Picture this: California, fuel light blinking, and the gas station you've relied on for years, gone. The next one, closed. The one after that, shuttered. This isn't some dystopian future. This is 3 weeks away. I'm Donald Douglas, and welcome to the Douglas Insights, where we cut through the noise to show you what's really happening. Today, we're exposing a crisis that's about to blindside millions of Californians, and the clock is ticking. Let's start with the bombshell. Shell, the second largest gas station network in California, is pulling the plug on over 200 locations across the state. We're talking about stations spanning from San Diego to Eureka, coastal communities to inland valleys, all going dark. Now, Shell framed this as part of a broader plan affecting stations across California, Nevada, and Utah. But here's what they're not saying. California is absorbing virtually the entire hit. This isn't a proportional distribution. The Golden State is bearing the brunt in a way that suggests something far deeper is unfolding. When the second biggest player in your state abandons ship completely, you're not just losing convenient fill-up spots. You're watching the systematic dismantling of infrastructure that took generations to build. But here's the kicker. Shell's exodus is just the opening act. The December 31st deadline, no one's talking about. While Shell makes headlines, there's another crisis that's been ticking like a time bomb. Over 600 gas stations across California are still running on single-walled underground storage tanks, and every single one of them must shut down permanently by December 31st. Let me be crystal clear. These aren't optional upgrades. The California State Water Resources Control Board has made it unambiguous. Any station still operating with these single-walled tanks after midnight on New Year's Eve gets red-tagged immediately. No warnings, no grace periods, no second chances. The penalties? $10,000 to $25,000 per tank, per day. And it gets worse. These tanks must be emptied within 72 hours of the deadline. No fuel deliveries, no dispensing remaining fuel. On January 1st, 2025, these stations become instant ghost stations, legally prohibited from doing business. Now, 600 stations might not sound catastrophic compared to the thousands operating statewide. But according to the California Fuels and Convenience Alliance, while only 2,000 single-walled tanks remain out of tens of thousands that once existed, the shutdown of these specific facilities will create disproportionate consequences that ripple far beyond the numbers. Why? Because these aren't strategically placed corporate stations. Many operate in rural and underserved communities where they're absolutely critical infrastructure. These independent stations are often the only fuel option within 30 to 50 miles. They offer lower prices to struggling consumers. They provide essential fuel for schools, first responders, farms, and medical facilities, the backbone services keeping communities alive. Alexandra Magnosco from the California Fuels and Convenience Alliance didn't mince words. The state is approaching a dangerous turning point. If nothing is done, the state will lose hundreds of small gas stations, and consumers will pay the price. The human cost, dreams destroyed. Over 5,000 mom-and-pop gas stations operate across California, according to the National Association of Convenience Stores. These aren't faceless corporations. These are family businesses serving their communities for generations. Charles Khalil owns 2 gas stations in the Los Angeles area. After over half a century in the gas business, he told the LA Times something chilling. Most independents will be put out of business. We are all going to suffer through it. Here's the irony. He drives a Tesla Model X. Even with his personal commitment to electric vehicles, he knows this transition will destroy thousands of small business owners who lack the resources to pivot. Then there's Adnan Abid, who operates a station in Glendale. He told the Times the mandate is not going to be fun for a lot of us. He looked into adding EV chargers. The quote he received wasn't economical. He investigated development potential for his property, but can't make moves until his contract with his gasoline distributor expires in 2026. He's trapped, unable to move forward, unable to stay put. Jeff Hansen's story perfectly captures this impossible situation. He owned Piedmont Auto Care, a beloved neighborhood Shell station in Oakland for 17 years. His single-walled tanks were installed back in 1989, when California actually mandated that all single-walled tanks be removed by December 1998. He looked at the costs, looked at the future, and made the brutal decision. It wasn't worth it. His station is now permanently closed. This pattern is repeating across California as owners run the numbers and realize there's no path forward. Let's talk about why these operators are choosing closure over compliance. When you see the numbers, you'll understand this isn't really a choice. It's a forced shutdown disguised as regulation. Removing and replacing single-walled underground storage tanks costs between $300,000 and $500,000 per tank. Most stations don't have just one tank. They have multiple tanks for different fuel grades plus diesel. A typical 3-tank setup could cost $500,000. $500,000 for a small business owner whose entire net worth might be tied up in their station. But wait, that $500,000 figure is just for tank replacement itself. It doesn't account for environmental cleanup, often required when old tanks are removed. And this isn't rare. 60% of single-walled tank closures result in discovering petroleum releases requiring expensive remediation. We're talking cleanup costs that can reach millions of dollars. But doesn't the state have programs to help, you might ask? Yes, the UST program for replacing, removing, or upgrading underground storage tanks. Grants range from $0 to $200,000, with a lifetime limit of $400,000 per business. Let me put that in perspective. If you need to replace 3 tanks at $400,000 each, that's $1.2 million. The maximum grant? $400,000. That leaves you $800,000 short. And station owners report wait times of up to 2 years just to get a decision on loan applications. 2 years. The deadline is 3 weeks away. Even those who navigate the bureaucracy and secure funding face one final obstacle. Licensed underground storage tank contractors are already booked solid through 2025. Owners who desperately want to comply literally cannot find anyone to do the work before the deadline. This isn't a compliance problem. It's compliance impossibility, deliberately created by regulatory dysfunction. The geographic nightmare. Lauren McDonald, an electric vehicle industry consultant tracking gas station trends, estimated that nearly half of California's mom-and-pop gas stations will close by 2030. His model assumes stations would close at rates of 1% to 2% per year, increasing to 5% annually as we approach that deadline. But here's the problem. That model was created before Shell announced their mass closure, and before the December 31st underground tank deadline became imminent. The combination means hundreds of stations will shut down in the next few weeks, not over the next decade. Years of projected closures compressed into weeks. The geographic impact reveals California's growing fuel deserts, areas where residents have little to no access to gasoline. Rural communities in the Central Valley, Northern California, and mountain regions often have just one gas station serving hundreds of square miles. When that single station closes, residents suddenly face round trips of 50 to 100 miles just to fill their tanks. Think about what that means. Emergency services, school buses, farm equipment, medical transport, all depend on local fuel availability. Losing the only station in a 40-mile radius doesn't just inconvenience residents, it threatens basic community functioning. Researchers at the Berkeley Energy Institute found that over 2,000 California gas station tanks are single-walled and need removal by late 2024. But here's the terrifying part nobody's discussing. Most manufacturer warranties only cover underground storage tanks for 30 years. Thousands of double-walled tanks installed in the 1990s, the compliant tanks that replaced old single-walled ones, are now approaching their expiration dates. Station owners who invested hundreds of thousands in the 1990s to upgrade their tanks now face another massive investment, just as the entire business model is being questioned. They face a brutal choice: invest hundreds of thousands in brand new tanks for a business model that might be obsolete within a decade, or close now while their property still has value. California's gas supply chain was already fragile before this closure wave. The state has virtually no pipelines bringing gasoline from other states. Every drop must be refined locally or imported by ship. With Phillips 66 and Valero refineries closing, removing 500,000 barrels per day of refining capacity, and now potentially 800-plus gas stations vanishing, the distribution network is actively collapsing. Entire regions could become fuel deserts, where the nearest gas is 50-plus miles away. This isn't a future projection. This is 3 weeks away. The EV transition myth. Now, I know what you're thinking. Donald, isn't this just the inevitable transition to electric vehicles? Isn't this actually good for the environment? Let me explain why that narrative completely falls apart when you examine what's actually happening on the ground. Ronnie Gveris, a commercial real estate broker with Northmark, told the LA Times there's strong demand for gas station sites because they're typically located on irreplaceable corners in high-traffic areas. Developers are offering huge buyouts to desperate station owners, knowing they can flip these prime locations into housing, retail, or mixed-use developments. So what's really happening? These valuable properties are being converted to uses that have nothing to do with electric vehicles or clean energy. They're becoming apartments and shopping centers. For operators who own their land, there's at least a financial exit. But for operators who lease, the majority of small operators, there's no windfall coming. They'll simply lose their livelihoods with nothing to show for decades of work. But can't they just add EV chargers? Carl Pankut, chief executive of Cleantech, an EV charging engineering firm, broke down the impossible math. Adding a high-powered DC fast charger costs $150,000 to $200,000 for equipment alone. Add another $100,000 to $200,000 for construction. The electrical infrastructure can occupy space equivalent to 3 parking spots. For a mom-and-pop owner, the total cost of adding just a single fast charger typically hits $400,000. But even if operators could afford the conversion, the economics don't work for small businesses. EV chargers are typically used just 10 to 20% of a 24-hour day, compared to gas pumps seeing constant traffic. It takes 20 to 30 minutes to charge an EV versus 3 to 5 minutes to fill a gas tank, dramatically lower customer throughput and revenue. McDonald confirmed it takes 5 to 10 years for EV chargers to become profitable, if they ever do. No small business can survive that cash flow drought. The convenience store crisis. Every gas station closure means losing the attached convenience store that often serves as the community's only source of groceries, household items, and basic services. In rural areas, these stores function as general stores, post offices, and community gathering places. They're the heart of small-town social infrastructure. The National Association of Convenience Stores reports these businesses employ an average of 8 to 12 workers per location. With potentially 800-plus stations closing, that's 6,400 to 9,600 jobs vanishing overnight. These aren't jobs easily replaced in small rural communities, where employment options are already limited. 3 weeks until impact. We're now 3 weeks away from what could be the single most disruptive infrastructure event in California's modern history, and almost nobody is talking about it. The December 31st deadline is absolute. No extensions, no waivers, no exceptions. The State Water Board has instructed enforcement agencies to begin red tagging non-compliant stations at 12:01 a.m. on January 1st. Stations continuing operations after the deadline face immediate shutdown, criminal prosecution, and personal liability for owners. This isn't a civil fine situation. This is potential criminal charges against business owners desperately trying to keep their livelihoods intact. And here's a cruel twist showing just how badly this was planned. The underground storage tank cleanup fund that helps pay for contamination discovered during tank removal expires on January 1st, 2025, the exact same day as the closure deadline. Owners who discover leaks during tank removal, which happens in 60% of cases, will have no financial assistance for remediation that could cost millions. They'll be personally liable for environmental damage that occurred decades before they even owned the property. Bob Reed's story encapsulates the generational destruction this represents. He's run the same station and service center on Palm Avenue in San Mateo since 1975. At 78 years old, he says he'll never sell because it took him so long to build the business, but he knows what's coming. My son and grandson will be the ones who are going to feel it. Let's talk about consequences that will touch every aspect of California life as the state's fuel distribution system, built over more than a century, collapses in weeks. Rural hospitals depending on diesel generators for backup power during grid outages could be compromised when fuel suppliers can't reach them or shut down entirely. School districts whose buses cannot reach distant gas stations will have routes disrupted, meaning children in rural areas could lose access to education. Farms whose equipment needs fuel for planting and harvest will face critical shortages during peak agricultural seasons. threatening California's $50+ billion agricultural economy. Delivery trucks keeping grocery shelves stocked will face longer routes and higher costs, passed on to consumers already struggling with inflation. Emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, needing immediate fuel access could face dangerous delays in remote areas, where the nearest station is now 50+ miles away. This is not just about gas stations. This is about the complete breakdown of California's fuel infrastructure at a moment when alternative infrastructure is nowhere near ready to replace it. The electric grid can't handle mass EV adoption. Charging infrastructure doesn't exist in rural areas. The electrical grid upgrades needed would cost tens of billions and take decades to complete. The bottom line. So there you have it, the full picture of a crisis unfolding in real time, while most of California remains completely unaware of what's about to hit them. In just 3 weeks, over 800 gas stations will cease to exist. Communities will lose critical infrastructure. Families will lose businesses they spent generations building. And California's fuel distribution network will suffer damage that could take decades to repair, if it ever can be repaired. The question I want you to think about, is this really a carefully planned transition to a clean energy future? Or is this a regulatory and economic disaster masquerading as environmental progress? I'm Donald Douglas, and this is the Douglas Insights. Drop a comment below. Have you noticed gas stations closing in your area? Do you live in a community about to become a fuel desert? How will this affect your daily life? If you found this deep dive valuable, if you appreciate someone actually connecting the dots and showing you what's really happening behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button right now. This is just the beginning of this story, and you'll want to stay updated as the January 1st deadline hits and real consequences start unfolding. Share this video with everyone you know in California. They need to understand what's coming. The mainstream media isn't covering this with the urgency it deserves, so it's up to us to spread the word. I'm Donald Douglas. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next insight.